Okay, aloha kako.
Aloha.
Um, our Ohina is James Kyo Iluna Kaulia, and that's him. Next slide, Ke olo olo. So we split up. We decided we learned some lessons with Navahi and saw areas where we could improve and where we could be a little bit more purposeful and directed in our research and where we wanted to go. So we were able to kind of utilize some of that. And so we knew from an article that we started with, and we'll get into the next slide, that Kaulia lived from 1860 to 1902. So it was a very short but fulfilled life, 42 years old. And so in that time that we searched in Papakilo, took those decades, and we got about 2,200 hits. And within those, and we just searched Kaulia. We didn't search J. Kaulia, we didn't search James Kaulia, we just took the last name. And within that, we found it's predominantly made up, obviously, of James Kaulia. But there's some of his father, Asa, or Hanai father, as we'll see, Mariah, his wahine, his son, James Opio, and then a bunch of Kaulia Makekea stuff from the Bible. So we went ahead and, weeded those things out and then collected 1,264 articles. So far, we have transcribed and translated. We have 82 articles transcribed and translated so far, and that comes out to about 175 pages. So we started with his obituary, with an obituary that actually Kamuela gave me this about 2 years ago, I think. So we had this, or I had this on my desktop before we started the Ohina, and I knew that it was filled with a bunch of things. So we used it as kind of a launching pad. And so in just this one article that we start with after he passes away in 1902, we find that he's born in the article it says Holua Loa. We find in some other articles references to Honua Ino. They're not that far away from each other. They're within a couple miles apart at the most, both in Kona, 1860. His birth parents are G.W. Laioha and Eva. And then later on, he is Hanai by G. Ahia and Mikala. And then Mikala later on remarries another Kane, Asa Kaulia. And James Kaulia then takes the last name Kaulia at that time. So he's not actually born a Kaulia. He's not originally Hanai by a Kaulia, but then through another marriage, eventually takes on that name and claims it pretty hard and pretty pridefully. And then so his wahine is Mariah. They get married January 2nd, 1879. They have 7 keiki. By the time James Kaulia dies, only one of them are alive. 6 of them have already passed away. And the one that's alive is James Opio, James Keo Malie Okalani Kaulia. It glances over his life. We see that he worked at Lewis Dickinson Lumber Firm. He was apprentice under Charles Mahoy in carpentry. He was a house painter under Kerr. He worked in the police department. He was a secretary for the office of the sheriff. He was later promoted to deputy of sheriff. Was interim sheriff for a little while before he went back to Oahu. Started getting involved a little bit in law and politics. He was a fruit peddler. He was a stevedore. He was a member of Kaumakapili Church and a pretty staunch, what is I don't know my terminology, like a devoted Christian, I would say. He was a firm believer. And utilized that in a lot of his talks and his directions. He apprenticed and learned the practice of law under Eskane, practiced in every court before the kingdom. Of course, his time at the Hui Aloha Aina, he was secretary and then later on president, up until the time that it came under its new name, the Home Rula. He was one of 50 people imprisoned at Kawa, and he was a delegate to DC. So we find all of these things just in that one article, and it gives us a good point of reference as to what we should be aware of, what we should be looking out for. And then of course there's other things, but it gave us a clear idea of who this person was and what we might not be, what we want to be aware of moving forward. And I think, yeah, and so we split it up within that 2200 or whatever we had. We didn't split it by years. We just took that amount, split it pretty evenly, actually by years, but based upon the amount of articles in that time. And so Eli took 1860 to 1884.
So this first time period, I got, and Kaho'oka, he touched on the way we split it up was based on the hits. So me having the first set had the least amount of hits relevant to James Kaulia that we were looking at. So a lot of the hits were for J.W. Kaulia, who was a sheriff in Ka'u, Asa Kaulia, his Hanai father, teachers in Olowalu, people across the Pai'aina. So it was kind of a challenge to sift through a lot of it. Some highlights from this time period: he was very involved in the church. He was the Ahuhui Kula Sabati for Kaneohe. He was really involved in that. He was voted Pu'uku for the Ahuhui Opiopio. Also, there's an article talking about one of his first assignments as a carpenter, helping to renovate the Kaneohe church. That was a pretty cool one. And also in this time period, there's an article talking about his wife giving birth to his first daughter. We when discussing as a hui, what we kind of wanted to focus on, his political impact in the time, his rise as a political player and everything, and also his attributes as a lawyer and being on the bar association and whatnot. So in this time period, there's a whole lot of hits on for him on his work in the church, about donations and whatnot. So something I learned from this was the importance on not dismissing a lot of the church articles. It was really cool to see. You really got a sense of his writer's voice, his author's voice, before he really grew and became the political figure that we're familiar with now. There's a bunch of articles giving aloha to people, the families of people who passed away and whatnot. And that was very, very cool. Showed some insight into his writing styles and whatnot. Next, please. Paani.
Yeah. So I had 1895 to 1894. Yeah, column I had 1895 to 1894. And all I knew about Kaulia before getting into this was what he had done with the Hui Aloha Aina and the delegation that went to Washington, D.C. But I didn't know anything about him prior to that. And that was kind of surprising. So just kind of looking through my time frame, this is kind of his adult years. He's maybe like his early 20s to into his early 30s. The articles was kind of up and down. But then when you look at the advertisements were close to zero up until 1892. And then 1892, he had 100 advertisements printed in the newspapers. 1893, he had 100. Then 1894 he had 118 or something like that. So and that kind of coincides with um, his rise to fame, if you want to call it fame. But before that, in the early 90s, the late 80s, he there was some stories about some embarrassing stories, some failed attempts at some. Well, if you guys go, if Anthony, you can go to the next screen. So 1886, he's 24 years old. He's already a captain in the Hawaii Police Department in Hilo. So that's pretty young to be a captain nowadays. But he was arrested while he was captain of police for public intoxication. So it's kind of, he's this young guy, got all his kuleana, but he's still, I mean, he's messing up. Yeah? So I thought that was pretty cool. That even with the Navajo collection, finding all of these kind of slightly embarrassing stories, not always glorifying stories, yeah, but finding their small faults. These people are human. But he's 24 years old. He's already risen to captain of the police department, but he's still 24 years old, and he gets arrested for public intoxication. The next slide, please. And then in 1892,
did you want to talk about Polehua?
Oh yeah. So going back, Anthony, please. If you guys look in the right in the center of that paragraph, so they call public intoxication by the word polehua, and I've never heard that. There's no dictionary definition. I'm not sure if there's any hits on Papa Kilo. I forget. This is like one of the first ones that I did. It's a few months ago already. But I thought that was pretty. I mean, there's public intoxication until today, and nobody's saying polehua. Yeah. But they did also put that in quotes, and then they also explained it in parentheses, ona akea. So I thought that was a pretty cool. That was actually one of my snippets in the first couple of weeks. That term polehua, especially since it's defined in parentheses directly afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a little gem in this story. Moving on, next one. In 1892, this was an important election for Lihau Kalani trying to push through a new constitution during 1892. So the Liberal Party kind of came to power during 1892. And Kaulia ran as a candidate for the Keiki Oiwi o Hawaii, or the Native Sons of Hawaii. I think that was kind of affiliated with the Hui Kala'aina. But then you guys can see on the right side that he was defeated in that election for representative for District 2 of Honolulu by J.W. Pibikane. So up until 1892, you kind of see these ups and downs. He's trying to make a name for himself, but then he's not really getting all the way there. And then in 1893, 1894, and then Kaho'okai is going to go on after 1894. It's like what do they call it? Like a meteoric rise to fame. He just shoots up and he's all over the place and he's the bee's knees. But it's almost only after the overthrow that you see that. During all of this times leading up to the overthrow, he's kind of up and down, and you kind of see that in the stories that's written about him. Next one. So this is in 1893. So he was a lawyer And it seems like that was one of the things that boosted his fame, or his boosted his name across Hawaii, is how good he was, how dedicated he was to his clients, and how his mastery of the law and all that kind of stuff. That seemed to be the booster that set him up for all of his famous deeds with the Ohina and Homerula afterwards. So this article right here says that his office is like a beehive swarming with bees, because everybody wants to get him to represent them in court.
What was the bee's knees?
Bee's knees. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Is that the correct term? Bee's knees?
Oh yeah, just
Correct, totally correct. Idiom.
Fabulous.
Oh, totally correct. That's what I thought. I knew I was. Yeah. Thank you.
Totally correct. Idiom. Yeah.
No, but after, from 1893, 1894, and then moving on after that, you can really see that he's all over the place, and when his name is on something, that means something. So that was kind of interesting, because I was assuming that I was just ignorant of his deeds before that, but it kind of seems like, no, he was just trying to make a name for himself and not really succeeding very well before his work with the Ohina. I'll move on to the next slide.
Oh, okay. So like we saw in the first one, he was one of a bunch of people that was arrested in the some of the resistance in 1895 to the overthrow. He was put in the jailhouse at Kaulia, and so these are the names of the people. They get released later on February 27th. They're put in the very beginning. I think it's January 6th. They go in, yeah. So that's just him and his name and a bunch of other names that go in with him in that time. Next one. And then he becomes a part of the Ahui Aloha when it's formed in 1893. Navahi is the president and Kaulia is the Kakao Olelo, the secretary. Pa'ani kind of mentioned how he kind of rises. He doesn't seem to get that much still political attention in these years. But it seems, based on things that we find a couple years later, that he's really, really working closely with Navahi. They form a pretty tight and trustworthy relationship. And on the left side of the screen, you just have someone who is writing in support when Navahi passes away in 1896, I think. And they need to vote in a new president. There's people writing into the newspapers calling for Kaulia to take the place, because he's the one that's been there side by side with Navahi from the very beginning. He knows the ins and outs. He knows the struggles. He's proven himself. And then so they have a vote on Laku Oko'a of that year. Kaulia wins. He goes up against Robert Wilcox and J.W. Pipikane, who ironically beat Kaulia in the 1892 election that we saw with Pa'ani. After Kaulia wins, William White from Kauai, I think, makes a motion to push all of Wilcox's and Bipikane's votes to Kaulia, since Kaulia already won, to show that the Lahui and the voters are unified behind their leader. And everybody does, except for 3 people from Maui. They're all pissed off that Wilcox lost, and they refuse to jump over. But so now he's the president of the Ahahui Hawaii Aloha Aina. Next one. And so this is, go back. This is just a one piece that kind of showed the relationship and that he had with Navahi. So after Navahi dies, so apparently Navahi has a flagpole, and the flagpole is at his house, and which is in Kapalama. And he never erects the flag because he promised, saying that once the monarchy was restored, then he would raise the Hawaiian flag. But of course, Navahi passes away and dies before that ever happens. And so Emma Navahi gives this flagpole to Kaulia. And Kaulia has a house in Kapalama. And so Kaulia puts the flagpole up, and he has this gathering, he has this ceremony, and he tells, how he's never erected it before. He's gonna do it now, to honor Navahi and the love he had for the people, the monarch, and the Lahui. And so he names this flagpole Kalamaku o Kealoha Aina. So I thought it was a cool piece. Just some of these personal things, the ins of their lives, the personal things that we wouldn't normally know, and to kind of just know the name of his flagpole is a little piece of information that I find cool and interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Kekahi aku. Going back again one time. So one thing that we find during this time is Kaulia making speeches, going across the islands, in his capacity and in his role as the president of the Hui Aloha Aina. And so, of course, one of the things we find is the Ahiki Ke Aloha Aina Hopeloa speech that is pretty well known, I guess, amongst some people today. But what's well known of the speech is, like the phrase is the Ahiki Ke Aloha Aina, until the very last Aloha Aina, and everybody's yelling it and everybody knows it. What was interesting about this speech is that this was actually Kaulia's very first public speech. It mentions that in the article. And so his first public speech is the one that everybody is talking about 100 and almost 30 years later. And what a lot of people continue to reference is the whole Ahiki Ke Aloha Aina Hopeloa. But what really catches on, and what really seems to be his main point in the speech, and the phrase that he carries on later on throughout his efforts with petitions and to Washington and protesting the annexation, is the phrase Payo he lolo me ka lolo, and the fight brain against brain. And so that's the phrase that really he continues to utilize. He's not going around all over the place yelling Ahiki Ke Aloha Aina Hopeloa. He's telling people Payo he lolo me ka lolo me ka lolo. And that's what he kind of becomes well known for during that time. Kekahi aku. Another interesting speech that he gives is during the time, the discussion about annexation, the second time around in 1897. And so there's this whole thing going on with Senator Morgan, right, who comes to Hawaii. And so Kaulia signs an invitation to Morgan to come and speak. And so the people start bashing Kaulia. Everybody's pissed off. This is not what Kaulia is supposed to be doing. Ku'e, ahiki, ke aloha, aina hopeloa, that kind of stuff. I think they forgot the lolo mekalolo part. And so Kaulia is catching a bunch of crap. And then he comes out in this public speech, and he basically kind of lays it out for the people, and he sets them straight. And he's like, well, what we get out of it is that Kaulia understands, what I got out of it, the difference between strategy and tactics. And he utilized that as an opportunity to get to know Morgan's perspectives and all of his plans. So everybody's thinking that Kaulia is going in because, he's interested and he wants to, maybe he's switching sides. Kaulia is just using it as an opportunity to have Morgan come out into the public, say some stuff where Kaulia is going to catch him and start cracking him publicly. And into the next slide, he talks about how that's not possible, or it wasn't possible, because the whole Lahui was too busy giving him crap and nobody came and supported. So he went into a situation where he was all alone. He starts talking about being a warrior on the battlefield and looking up, and his whole army is gone and he's there by himself. And so during the whole speech, when he's first laying it out and he's explaining to people what he's doing, everybody's yelling. He's saying, I signed Morgan's, I signed the letter to Morgan, and everybody, is pissed off about it. And everybody starts responding, yeah, screw you, Kaulia, we're all pissed off. But by the end of the speech, when he starts explaining to them what he was doing and why he did it, then of course, just like all of his other speeches, he starts getting the ekoluhuro, the ekoluhuro. But it was interesting to kind of see him just lay it out straight and have to explain to them publicly, in a sense, what his tactics were, when probably he'd rather not have to, and probably thought that he wouldn't need to, but realized apparently that he did. Next one. And so he goes to DC. He sent off one of 4 delegates with David Kalani, the president of the Hui Kalai Aina, John Richardson, and William Auld. They stay at the Ebbett House. They leave Hawaii in November of 1897. They get there later on that month, towards the end. Kalani is reappointed as president of the Kalai Aina, Kaulia of the Hui Aloha Aina, and they take up with them the petitions. And during this time, Kaulia and the other delegates are writing back to the Lahui routinely. They're writing letters frequently. They're sending them to the newspapers, and the newspapers are publishing them for the public to see. And they're giving updates as to what's happening. And in these updates, we see the sincere, not hope, but the belief based on the things that they've been able to do and the conversations they've had, and the amount of people they've been able to sway there, that they have absolutely killed annexation. They arrive in Washington. There are 58 votes in the Senate in support of annexation. They need 2 more. Once they get to 60, they can pass it. So when they get up there, they're being told by people, you guys wasted your time. There's no reason being here. It's done. It's going to go through. And Kaulia folks have a hard time getting meetings. And so they eventually do, and they start meeting with senators, and they talk about how they're doing it all at the late hours of night. They can't get them by day. They're meeting at 10, they're meeting at 11, they're meeting at 12. They're bringing them to their hotel rooms. They're going to their houses. And they're not just meeting with senators who are supportive of them, but they're meeting with the other side. And they get one of the senators, Hoare, who is a prominent supporter of annexation, to shift over to their side. And he's the one that submits the petitions on their behalf. And he submits them before the Senate, and he submits a total of 21,269 names. This is the petition that was gathered by the Hui Aloha Aina. They withheld the one from the Kalai Aina, but they give updates later on that was submitted as well. And it's just it's a cool kind of insight into what's happening. There's letters coming from Queen Lili'uokalani as well, talking about her meetings with them. They're meeting with her, Joseph Heleluhe and her kind of group over there. So it was I appreciated this section of it, hearing firsthand from them what it's like, what they were doing, who they're talking with, and the amount of attention that they paid to what was happening, and the amount of dialogue that they included in these letters. There's a lot of quotes, back and forth conversations from different meetings at different days and different times in different places. But it was neatly kept and reported back to the Lahui. And is there another one, or is that it?
Ko'okahi.
Eo.
Can I just, I want you to point out that in the course of their reports, they're able to sway enough Senate members to bring that down from 58 to 43, which is why they're certain they cannot pass a treaty without a 2/3 majority. So they're reporting on the numbers of folks who are moving with them, right?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make it. I forgot that part. Yeah, when they got there, it was 58, but they were able to bring it down to 46 by the time that they left. They brought it down 12 votes. So by that point in time, it was dead. And Kaulia talks about it. He keeps telling the Lahui, "Ua kanuola ia, ua kanuola ia." He keeps referring to it being buried alive. And yeah, so they have that hope and that belief, and obviously it worked out. They defeated it. The treaty didn't pass. It was just a joint resolution the following year. But
can I ask you to talk a little bit about, this delegation goes up, and for many of these senators, and it's in their letters, is that for many of the senators, this is the first opposition they've ever heard of. This is the first Hawaiians they'd ever met. So their insight into, we should have been here from the beginning, perhaps, but the fact that being here was so critically important.
Yeah, they're meeting with, I think it's Senator Hoare, Davis, the Secretary of State, or what do you call it? Sherman. They meet with the Vice President, and in one of these meetings, the guy mentions how this is the first they've ever heard of there being any opposition to annexation. They thought, everybody was for it. They thought there was a treaty submitted on behalf of the people, and nobody came up in 1894 when it was up for discussion last time, and so they tell Kaulia folks how important it was that they came up, and that until they came up, they had no idea that there was any opposition. They definitely had no idea that it was to the extent that it was, with the 21,000 plus signatures. And in one of those exchanges too, one of these, I think it's Hoare, he asked them, are you all full-blooded Hawaiians? And I think it's William Auld responds, oh no, just the two of us, Auld and Richardson. But the two of them, Kalani and Kaulia, they're full-blooded Hawaiians. He said, oh, this is the first I've ever met I've never met a Hawaiian before. It's the first time I've ever laid eyes on one. And so he kind of has that exchange, but just an interesting, interesting question. And then, him, the two of them being hapa versus being full, and him not having any idea or any clue as to there being a difference between them. Another interesting thing, last one from it, is William Auld actually goes up there as not just a secretary, but as a translator, as an interpreter for David Kalani. It doesn't clarify whether Kalani does not speak English, but it does say that William Auld is there as a secretary and as an interpreter to serve to Kalani. So that was another interesting piece that came out of it. But yeah, I think that's all. Hold on.
What how old was he when he was hanai by out to his hanai?
Oh yeah.
I think he was old. I want to
teens, 20s.
I want to say late teens. Late teens.
Interesting. And my only other question is, so from what you knew before you jumped into this topic, because you guys just did Nawahi, do you have a better insight into Kaulia's role now in the whole bigger picture than you had assumed before jumping into Kaulia?
I think so. I think a better understanding of what that role was. Again, I think for the most part, and maybe I mean, of course I'm limited just by what I know, but I think most people just know Kaulia for a single speech.
Right.
And a line of a speech. Being a name on a petition that was able to gather a bunch of signatures. But I don't think most people know the amount of work that went into it, the amount of commitment it took, the amount of ridicule he received. It wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't all likes and reposts. There was a bunch of shit talking too, even in the churches. We see articles like that. Later on, we haven't been able to go over it with Kumu yet, but I have an article where Kaulia gets mobbed on a ship, and he is pushed into a lua ukana, whatever that, a luggage, some kind of luggage compartment or whatever, but it's into the lua up, the Lua Ukana. He's stuck in there. He breaks his arm. There's these three Haole guys, German guys, I think, and you know, and then his kids, all 7 kids born, 6 of them die. There's a and to commit to the Lahui the way he did, going to jail, just all those little things that maybe we might guess at or assume at, just because that was kind of what the time was, for people who resisted in that way. But to see those more in depth, to look at them, even the way that we have kind of just building year by year, we didn't just take random sections. We can see a growth and a development over time. It was really valuable. And then within this too, we find potential for other Ohina that we start talking about. And you know, based on where we're right now, what we're thinking of doing with the next Ohina, we had no no clue we would ever land there, no intention of doing so, but just through what came out of this, that came up, and we kind of talked about it, and we're kind of set on at this point on moving into that one for the next one. So
So you wrote about it in your logs and your
Which one? Did you say which one?
No, he didn't. That's next. We have one more group to go. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kaulia.
One last thing.
Can I ask for,
What? Go ahead.
just real quick, did you guys have plenty overlap with the Hui Aloha Aino na Wahine? Like stuff that they did, or not so much?
you see it. You see a bunch of combined meetings, different executive branches coming together as one. The Hui Aloha Aina, we didn't dive into a lot of those translations because the focus, we did keep on Kaulia, but the Hui Aloha Aina na Wahine played an incredible role in allowing Kaulia folks to go to Washington. They were the ones spearheading and organizing the fundraising, getting the monies, sending it off to them. Koi Helani Campbell is the one tracking all of that, reporting on the finances. They're organizing, luau's for them. So we see those types of things.
Also, a lot of the signature collecting too was done by the Wahine as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're writing back to they're writing, communicating with each other, while they're gone. So there's not maybe so much that's gonna pop up, but just because there's a lot of things that we saw that we didn't translate as well too, and to kind of having the ability to put those pieces together. The Hui Aloha Aino na Wahine is definitely not just like a women's, side of a group. They were instrumental in all of those success that it did.
Their own force.
The other thing is this, the Navahi and Kaulia, well, this Kaulia more so dovetails with the Huakai Helea Liliu group from last Ohina, right? This certainly, there's a lot of overlap between, and now they're both there together, which is what you guys covered, and now Kaulia is there. So it's cool how the themselves will overlap. And I think somebody else ran into a Kaulia thing in their Ohina, but they all kind of overlap at some point. These were all intermingling. Yeah. Okay, if there's no more question, we'll have our last team.
I would just, before it goes, I know that the material's there, but there's not probably, part of this Ohina. But the notion of how Navahi played a mentorship and sort of a guiding role for Kaulia's development, as Navahi is ahead of him in being a lawyer, being a political figure, being, so he's just enough ahead to be able to investigate that kind of relationship and how it fostered both the foundation and the sort of public presence of Kaulia, and built his cred. That would be a really interesting place to go.